I am a backpack. Not the shiny kind with perfect zippers and that new smell, but the kind that's been through things. Worn at the edges, patched twice at the seams, with a stubborn ink stain that never quite washed out. I've been forgotten more times than I've been remembered. I know what it feels like to be left behind. That's why I recognized it in her eyes the moment he found her. It was the coldest night of the year when he discovered her, a girl no older than 18, shivering by the roadside, clutching me to her chest like I was the last thing keeping her from disappearing completely. The snow fell mercilessly, each flake another accusation against a world that had turned its back on her. I felt her tears seep through my fabric long before he saw them. Mason didn't ask questions when he stopped his truck. He didn't lecture or hesitate. He simply opened his door and said, "You'll freeze out here." His voice was rough from disuse, but gentle in a way that made her grip on me loosen slightly. "I'm fine," she whispered, but her blue-tinged lips betrayed her. "No one who's fine sits in a snowstorm," he replied, extending his hand. "I have a cabin just up the road. Warm. Safe. You can leave whenever you want." I felt her hesitation, the way her fingers dug deeper into my straps, the slight tremble that wasn't just from the cold. Trust is a luxury for those who've never had it broken. But the wind cut sharper, and finally, she nodded. Inside his truck, the heater sputtered weakly. She kept me clutched against her swollen belly. Yes, she was pregnant, though she tried to hide it beneath my bulk. I'd been carrying that secret for months now, along with a crumpled letter from parents who'd told her not to come back. A small stuffed rabbit meant for a baby she wasn't sure she could keep. And exactly $27.13. I knew everything about her that mattered. Her name was Ellie. She was 18, and she believed she was worth nothing. Mason's cabin appeared through the snow like something from a forgotten dream. Small, weathered, but with windows glowing amber against the darkness. As we approached, I saw a young girl's face press against the glass, then disappear. "My daughter, June," Mason explained, helping Ellie from the truck. "She's 10. Doesn't talk much, but she sees everything." Inside, the warmth hit us like a physical force. The cabin smelled of pine and something bacon. Cinnamon, maybe. June stood in the doorway to what must have been the kitchen, watching with solemn eyes that seemed too old for her face. "This is Ellie," Mason said simply. "She's going to stay with us tonight." June didn't speak, just nodded once and disappeared back into the kitchen. That night, Ellie slept on the couch, still holding me close. I felt her tears soak through my fabric again, but these were different. Quiet, relieved, confused. She whispered into me, as she often did when we were alone. "What am I doing here? Why would he help me?" I wished I could answer her. I wished I could tell her that some people are lighthouses. They don't ask why you're lost at sea. They just shine so you can find your way home. In the morning, June appeared beside the couch, startling Ellie awake. The child didn't speak, just held out a folded stack of clothes and pointed upstairs, presumably to a bathroom. When Ellie returned, showered and wearing the oversized sweater and leggings, Mason was at the stove making pancakes. He didn't ask where she'd come from or why she was alone. He just slid a plate across the counter and said, "Eat." She did, and I watched from my place beside the couch as something inside her began to thaw. Days passed. The snow continued. Ellie's temporary stay stretched into a week, then 2. She began to help around the cabin, washing dishes, sweeping floors, reading to June in the evenings by the fire. She kept me close, though, always within reach, as if afraid someone might take away her escape route. I knew what she kept inside me now, a growing collection of small kindnesses. A drawing June had made of 3 stick figures and a round circle, Ellie's belly. A wooden bird Mason had carved one evening, sanded smooth and perfect. A recipe for the stew she'd learned to make that made Mason smile for the first time since we'd arrived. But she also kept her fear. At night, when the house was quiet, She would open me and count her money. Now, $34 from odd jobs in town. Not enough. Never enough. One evening, as snow tapped gently against the windows, June approached Ellie with a book. It was worn at the edges, clearly well-loved. "Mom used to read this," she said, her voice so soft it was almost a whisper. It was the first time I'd heard the child speak. Ellie took the book with trembling hands. "Would you like me to read it to you?" June nodded, then added, "Dad doesn't read it right. He doesn't do the voices." That night, as Ellie read about a lost rabbit finding its way home, I watched Mason in the doorway, silent tears tracking down his weathered face. When June fell asleep, he didn't move her, just covered her with a blanket and sat across from Ellie. "Her mother died 3 years ago," he said quietly. June stopped talking after. "The doctors called it selective mutism. Said she'd speak when she was ready." He looked at his daughter, then back at Ellie. "That's the first time I've heard her voice since the funeral." Ellie's hand instinctively went to her belly. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You gave me back something I thought was gone forever." He hesitated. "You could stay, you know, after the baby comes. There's room." I felt Ellie stiffen. Hope is the most terrifying thing when you've trained yourself not to want it. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "You don't even know me." Mason looked at her for a long moment. "Sometimes you don't need to know someone's whole story to recognize they belong in yours." That night, Ellie cried into my fabric again. But these weren't tears of fear or confusion. These were the tears of someone seeing a future they never dared imagine. The baby came during the first thaw of spring. It wasn't planned. Babies rarely consult calendars, and it happened fast. Too fast for the midwife to arrive from town. Mason, who had delivered calves and foals in his younger days on his father's farm, rolled up his sleeves and became both doctor and coach. I watched from the corner where Ellie had placed me, stuffed with clean towels and tiny clothes June had helped prepare. I'd never felt so useless and so important all at once. When the baby girl finally arrived, her cry split the air like lightning. Fierce, alive, undeniable. Mason wrapped her in a soft blanket and placed her in Ellie's arms. "She's perfect," Ellie whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She's so perfect." "What will you call her?" June asked, peering at the tiny red face with wonder. Ellie looked up at Mason, then at June, then back at her daughter. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." And just like that, I wasn't carrying Ellie's escape plan anymore. I was carrying her future. Seasons changed. Hope grew from a bundle to a crawler to a toddler with her mother's eyes and a laugh that filled the cabin like music. June spoke more each day, especially to Hope, telling her elaborate stories about the forest creatures and teaching her to recognize bird calls. Mason built an addition to the cabin, a small room connected to June's, with a crib he carved himself, and walls painted the color of summer sky. Ellie took classes at the community college in town, studying to become a nurse. She still kept me, though not as close. I lived on a hook by the door now, filled with different things. Hope's extra clothes, snacks for long car rides, a small first aid kit, and a worn copy of the book June had first asked her to read. I was no longer a getaway plan. I was part of a life being built, stitch by careful stitch. One evening, as autumn painted the world in fire, Ellie sat on the porch steps writing in her journal. Mason joined her, offering a steaming mug of cider. "What are you working on?" he asked. "Letters," she replied, "for Hope. I want her to know everything someday, where she came from, how we found our way here." Mason nodded. "That's a gift." Ellie looked up at him, her eyes clear and steady in a way they hadn't been that first night. "You saved us, you know." He shook his head. "No, you saved yourself. You were brave enough to accept help, brave enough to stay, brave enough to build something new." He paused. "You saved us, too. This house wasn't a home until you and Hope filled it with life again." Inside, I could hear June reading to Hope, doing all the voices just right. Outside, the space between Ellie and Mason grew smaller, their shoulders touching as they watched the sunset paint the mountains gold. I've been witness to many things in my years: tears and laughter, fear and courage, endings and beginnings. I've held secrets and hopes, plans and memories, but nothing has filled me with more purpose than watching a family be built not from obligation or blood, but from choice, from love that grows in the broken places. I am just a backpack, worn, patched, stained with the evidence of a life fully lived. But I know this. Sometimes the most important journeys aren't about where you're going, but who you become along the way. And sometimes the family you find in the storm is the one you were meant to have all along. Ellie still carries me sometimes, though not out of fear. Now I hold picnic supplies for family outings, or extra clothes for overnight trips to visit the ocean. Sometimes, when Hope is sad or scared, Ellie lets her hold me close, the way she once did. A reminder that it's okay to need something to hold on to when the world feels too big. And on quiet nights, when the house is still and everyone is sleeping, I watch over them all from my hook by the door. The lighthouse keeper, the silent child who found her voice, the mother who found her strength, and the little girl named for the thing that saved them all. I am a backpack. I know what it means to be left behind, but I also know what it means to be carried forward into something beautiful. And that, I think, is the greatest journey of all.